Good morning, everyone, and thanks a lot for the nice introduction. So today I'll talk about circular plastics, the options, threats, and opportunities for the European petrochemicals and plastics industry. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah, thanks. So the talk is structured as follows. First, I'll introduce my organization TNO, our vision on circular plastics for the long term. Then I'll cover the mega trends and long-term outlook for the industry, and also touch upon the European chemicals and plastics industry's risks, options, and the opportunities which exist for it. Few technology pathways which are available for the industry as a whole, and a scenario for 2030 for the Netherlands as an example here on how do you do scenario analysis. Next slide, please. So we, STNO, are a Dutch research organization for applied research. We connect people and knowledge, creating innovations, and the emphasis is to actually create sustainable, boost the competitiveness of the industry and the society as a whole, thereby actually strengthening the well-being of the society. Next slide, please. We have more than 1,000 public-private partnerships across the world with 800 plus patents and 40 plus lecture professors across in the Netherlands as a whole. And we have 3,800 employees who are dedicatedly working on societal issues across sectors. Next slide, please. Yeah, our vision for circular economy is to have an economy in which materials are optimally reused and recycled. And the emphasis is to have a clean environment with integrated approach to CO2 management as well, and to reduce CO2. So the aim is to have a net zero reduction targets. Ambition is to actually optimize the value chains by improving the ecological footprints and also improving the environmental and economic impacts across sectors, plastics being one of those. And our strategy to do and achieve our vision and mission is to actually work on circular designs for value chains across sectors, including the plastics, multiple value chains downstream, and working on development of disruptive technologies. We are really heavy into technology development space across sectors, including the petrochemicals as a whole. And there are a few examples in my slide I will mention. Can you move forward to the next slide? Yeah, so the core issues which we face as of now are the climate change and the circular economy, or the linear economy as such. And this is really an unprecedented situation here. We haven't faced this since the start of the Industrial Revolution. Since last 200 years, no issue has been so complex what we see now to address. The ecosystem of the climate change is already making a big impact. The world is only 8.6% circular. Ma'am mentioned about 9%. This number has already dropped down in the recent report. So we are around somewhere 7% or so across sectors globally. And there are challenges to actually increase that number as we move forward. But not everything is bad here. There have been certain targets on the positive side by achieving 90% of GDP potential on circular economy and net zero targets placed by governments and industry as a whole. So these two mega trends, climate and circular economy, is really high on the agenda across the world, on the governments and also on the industry. As an example, the European Plastic Pact, they want to achieve a 30% recycled content in weight in plastic across sectors, across applications, and packaging being one of the dominant ones here. But that target is for 2025, and then you also have 2050 targets set by the Paris Climate Agreement. And we have challenges to actually achieve those and meet those targets. Next slide, please. Now, what drives specifically for the chemical industry? There are several forces which are really active in this space for the industry, starting from the climate change risk, followed by the unprecedented societal challenge. Consumers are becoming increasingly aware and they demand sustainable solutions, especially in the Western geographies, such as Europe and now followed by US. Investors are also asking for ESG from the industry, and shareholder activism is really at the highest level at this point in time. There is also competition within the industry for brand differentiation, and there are geopolitical risks attached because of this recent war which is happening in Russia and along with Ukraine. The regulatory pressure, as you would have seen from Ms. Sanchita, like it's really at all-time high, coming in from the governments across the world. The challenge is on the technology development and deployment, because how do you actually deploy new technologies in a complex sector as chemicals is always an issue, and since last 70, 80 years. Next slide, please. Now the 2050 outlooks, well, the left one is from McKinsey, the right one is from the Nova Institute, Germany. So McKinsey predicts that there will be 1% virgin plastics demand growth, which is for the virgin plastic materials globally by 2050. And for the recycled materials, it will be somewhere between 7 to 8%. We can, of course, argue what is the exact number, but that's the broad range there. On the right side, NOAA also gives their wish. This is not a forecast. This is kind of a wish list from their side. I checked with them. And they also show that recycled component is also going to be a big dominant space for the plastics. Two different narratives or assessments, but the narrative is rather similar. There is a momentum shift towards circular economy and decarbonization, and that has its consequences to the industry, which I'm going to talk about. Next slide, please. Now, the world chemical and plastic statistics, if you look on the left side chart, has been steadily growing across the globe, but there have been a dominant shift from Western geographies in terms of production and demand to the Eastern geographies. China has actually ramped up capacities like anything. You will see five-fold increase in 10 years or 15 years from their side. The same is observed on the right side for the plastics. So this is for the entire chemical space. This is specifically for the plastics, the right side figure. Now because of this shift, there are capacity shutdowns in the Western geography, especially in Europe, and that has its consequences. So European plastics demand has been stable, but the capacity has been reducing since last 10 years, 20 years or so. Next slide, please. Now, if we want to go deeper into understanding what is the impact to the industry because of this structural shift, the left side chart gives interesting insights, which is the ethylene cash cost curve. So on the right side, you will see the European crackers in terms of production cost, which essentially says that they are the most costliest producers for ethylene and downstream derivatives. Middle East and US have a low cost feedstock advantage, which is on the east side of the curve, which is ethane based crackers. And new capacities because of this are being added in US and in Middle East as such. And China, of course, plays a big role there. Now, because of all these aspects, the European plastic industry is really being threatened by cheaper imports from US and Middle East. And there is a need for the European industry to differentiate. So how do they actually balance and plays out their, protect their market share in their geography? Next slide, please. The problem becomes extremely complex. If you see the customer and sectoral mix of the industry, this is extremely complex situation for the industry, which serves several markets, several applications downstream, several customers demanding on very differentiated solutions as well. So it's very difficult or extremely hard to provide niche solutions or very specific solutions for individual customers or customer segments such as automotives. On top of it, the complex supply chain per sector, such as automotives or packaging, leads to challenges on establishing a cost-effective circular solution. So the challenge is from technology development side, from market share protection, plus also from establishing a cost-effective solution for the industry. Next slide, please. Same situation is for the downstream plastics aspect. So it's extremely hard to provide niche circularity solutions for every product. And then the high product development cost really eats into the industry margin. So what we have to actually offer is platform-based approach to the industry, from the industry to actually overcome the challenges of an individual product development aspect there. So plastics packaging is the most dominant one. With 40% of the European plastics demand, probably it will be the same in other geographies as well, going into packaging. So a platform-based approach can be applied where you really weed out polymer products which are really very low in volumes, and then actually establish through regulations certain guidelines for the industry to offer, or actually go down into material solutions built from few products rather than actually multiple polymer types being used in a single application type here. Next slide, please. Now, the risks for the industry to adopt circular economy are several. So there is a business model risk, whether the business model for the industry player will really fly or not. There is a regulation or a geopolitical risk for a player to implement circular economy solution. There are market risks and there are also technology risks, because there are many technologies which are under development, but which are going to be the winning technologies, it is not clear yet. Then there is product quality. Food grade is as an issue. Food grade applications already provide challenges because you can't use recycled material in food grade because there is health and hygiene and the safety aspect for the users involved. There is, of course, cultural aspect, which ma'am mentioned earlier in her presentation. Lack of awareness or willingness or agility to engage within the circular economy as a solution. There are also certain opportunities to implement circular economy because there is a growing demand in the market. Players can actually offer and meet those demand. There is also premium attached to circular products. If you have a recycled product in the market, because there is a supply-demand mismatch, you can extract premium from the industry. And also there are barriers to entry are rather low in this industry, because chemical industry is as such a very high barrier to entry for a new player. A lot of investment is required before you actually set up a new plant. But for mechanical recycling, those barriers really come down significantly. Next slide, please. So now I will shift and go towards technology pathways. So you saw the risks to the industry and the opportunities on circular economy. Broadly, there are 4 technology pathways for the chemical industry to offer circular economy solutions on the technology side. So these are purely on the technical side. There are also bio-based options as well. First one is a mechanical recycling. The second one is a purification technology such as dissolution, where you really purify a polymer, clean it out through solvents and actually feed it back to the polymer chain. The third one is a depolymerization technology such as solvolysis or acidolysis technologies, where you chop down the polymer or a plastic into its core fundamental monomers form. The last one is really the last resort, like feedstock recycling technologies such as pyrolysis, gasification can play a role. So all of these 4 different technology platforms have their own different aspects of ownership or technology players which are active globally, and some slight changes in the technology as such, depending on the operating conditions and how the technology has been matured by a specific player. Next slide, please. As an example, so you saw those 4 different technology pathways. The one example here is of pyrolysis. So when the product actually enters at the end of life, rather than going to a landfill or incineration, it gets sorted out, cleaned, and finally goes as a mixed plastic waste stream. So this stream should ideally not go for mechanical recycling because it is not suitable for mechanical recycling. You apply a technology such as pyrolysis. You upgrade that pyrolysis oil to a quality which is really ready as a feedstock to a naphtha cracker on top. And finally, from naphtha cracker, the same product as a polymer comes out. This will be as good as a virgin scale polymer. So this product application can go into food grade applications as well, unlike mechanical recycling, which has its challenges for food grade applications. Now, several players are active in developing these technologies, including Shell, SABIC, BASF, Dow, Petronas, LyondellBasell, and some small capacities have also come up in this space, especially in Europe and US. But this has really not ramped up at a mass market solution at the capacity levels which the industry needs. Next slide, please. Now, the previous one were technology solutions coming in from fossil feedstock side. There are other platforms which are available for bio-based chemicals, because this space actually allows you to make the entire circular economy really fundamental at its core, because then you get rid of the fossil carbon, inject the bio-based carbon into the industry and the value chain as such. So there are 8 platforms. I'll not go through those details. But I would like to highlight that these 8 platforms have multiple pathways. On the right side, you will see those, which again leads to high complexity and risk for placing bets on the winning technologies. And that's why the adoption of these technologies is rather slow in the industry. And even the governments are not clear where they should actually subsidize and also give incentives to the industry. Next slide, please. Now, all possible pathways needs attention because some technologies will fail, and in the next 20, 30 years, we really don't know which are the winning technologies. So you need those solutions as such. As a separation of these technology pathways from the bio-based ones, there are certain options such as drop-ins. As an example you saw for pyrolysis oil, these can be drop-ins which go into the industry where you don't need to change the existing value chains as such of the industry. You just make a product from bio-based, which is a bio-based feedstock injected into the fossil carbon. Then there are solutions such as smart drop-ins, where you inject the bio-based molecules rather late into the value chain. So they will have their own bio-based value chain development, processing, but the injection of the bio-based solutions are rather late. Then there are, of course, dedicated bio-based value chains, which are essentially independent of the fossil value chain. So you actually have a new polymer type which does not have an example in the fossil value chain. Next slide, please. Now, as an example, for these platforms, a bio-based drop-in is from making biopolyethylene from waste animal fat or crude oil. So waste animal fat is a waste product coming in from the leather industry and also from the meat processing industry. Then there is also crude tall oil, which can be used for and used as a feedstock for the biorefinery. After its hydrotreatment, it can again be injected at the same location as a cracker input, which will replace the fossil naphtha. There are, of course, again, many players who are active in this space, but the challenges lie in terms of how you are going to meet the full capacity requirements or the demand requirements of the industry, because this also has limitations from the supply side. Next slide, please. Now, to understand what will be an implication of different scenarios for the Netherlands, we did a scenario evaluation for 2030 as an example. This simplistic scenario actually assumes there will not be any imports for waste plastic feedstock in the Netherlands, and at the same time, incineration will be phased out, or will be likely be phased out by 2030. This scenario actually gives interesting overview that multiple technologies will be available or are needed to make the Netherlands economy circular by 2030 in terms of consumption, but not in terms of production, because there is a significant export of plastics material from the Netherlands. So the local consumption is just 1/3 of the overall production by the industry. Now, efforts to meet circularity targets will contribute towards climate change, but vice versa will not work here, because you start hitting limitations there. However, meeting the circularity targets will not be sufficient to meet the entire climate goals. So there is, of course, synergy across the climate targets and the circular economy targets, but assuming the circular economy targets will lead to meet the net zero targets will not happen. There is a big gap there. Next slide, please. Now, we also made an assessment from which technologies will have a specific opportunity side, right from mechanical dissolution, depolymerization, pyrolysis, and gasification. What we see is that pyrolysis and gasification have an sufficient opportunity size with respect to depolymerization technologies as well. This is coming in from two aspects. One is product polymer combination here, because depolymerization can't be applied for multiple polymer types. There are only specific polymer types where it can be applied. The other one is, of course, the volumes available for the feedstock and the nature of the feedstock for depolymerization. Because pyrolysis and gasification can rather use mixed plastic waste. For depolymerization, you need a pure stream there. So the sorting techniques become really important there as well. The other emphasis is dissolution will continue to be a niche solution, and it can't have be scaled up to a level as pyrolysis or gasification. So it has its own space, but assuming that dissolution will reach out to the levels of pyrolysis or gasification, yeah, as a player, you will lose out making money on that. Next slide, please. Now we rolled up those numbers and also did an analysis for Europe as a whole. On the left side chart, there is virgin production plus in the Europe, then followed by the demand for plastic waste and the total installed capacity with respect to recycling. What is interesting to note is that there is a gap versus what has been announced as plastic recycling targets versus announcement in terms of plastics recycling capacities. So how are we going to bridge that gap is a challenge, because setting up these plants take long time, like easily 7 to 8 years or 10 years it takes from announcement to installation of a commercial facility for recycling. And the other analysis we figured out was that European reprocessing and mechanical recycling have room to scale up because it is still on a low side. But meeting those targets will be an issue. The last one is that there will be risk of idle capacity of excess percent. I can't make that statement which percent it will be in terms of virgin plastic capacity, which means that there will be some shutdowns announced in the industry because of the shift in increased demand for recycling and also capacity additions from the recycler side as well. And the virgin plastic capacity will actually shut down as we go forward by 2030 and in the long run as well. This will be further. And there was, so I made this prediction 2 years back, and recently there was already an announcement by a player that they're going to shut down. So this prediction has held true. And Europe is just an example here, because we are going to see the same. If we are serious about circular economy and decarbonization targets, the same situation will evolve in India 20 years down the line as well. So if you're setting up a new coal-fired power plant or setting up a new virgin material polymer plant in India, there will be challenge. So the business case risk will be there. Next slide, please. Now, just to summarize my entire slide, I would like to make a statement here that it's not the strongest or the most intelligent species that actually survive, but the most adaptive to change. And the industry as a whole, the European industry has, chemical industry and the plastics industry has to be responsive to change, to compete with the other sectors, especially on circular economy and decarbonization. And the same will actually evolve in Asian markets, maybe a decade later or 20 years later. Thank you very much, and I'm open for questions.